Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and today I'm reflecting on my lessons from 2020. If you're listening to this episode when it launches at the end of 2020, we've made it. We've survived one of the most challenging and strange years our generation has known. And if you're listening any other time, know that what I share in this episode will be relevant to reflect on at any time. It would be easy to walk away from this year and just close the door on it without looking back, hoping that we never have another year like this again. But as difficult as it's been, I think there's some deeply profound and important lessons that I want to take from this year. And in this episode, I'll be sharing what my lessons have been. And I hope that they help you reflect on your year too, so we can carry what we need to into the new year and leave behind what we need to as well. And why do this? Naturally, I'm a very future-orientated person, so it doesn't come naturally to me to reflect on the past. So it'd be really easy for me to rush into 2021 after the hell of a year that 2020's been. But if I rushed in to do that, I'd really miss the goodness that came from this year. And yes, in all the challenges and heartache, there was some real goodness. So I wanted to go mining for that gold before saying goodbye to 2020. But before we dive in, I'd like to do a listener shout out, and I'd like to thank you, Laura Special K, I love that handle by the way, who left a review on Apple Podcasts, and she said, "I eagerly await the next episode of Nikki's podcast every time. With 3 young children and an often intense full-time role, I can be so overworked and overwhelmed that I sometimes feel only just on the verge of sanity. So I stick in my earphones, put on the podcast, and let Nikki accompany me while I potter around doing the washing, the dishes, the cooking. It feels like lovely me time while still achieving the household tasks that I want to achieve. I love hearing all the insights, but I just find the conversation, either with a guest or with Nikki alone, really positive and encouraging. It feels like I'm part of a sisterhood of working mums who cope with the same practical and emotional barriers. Thanks, Nikki, and can't wait to hear the next episode." Oh my gosh, Laura, thank you. It means the world to me to know that you feel part of this sisterhood. That was always my hope and intention when I started this podcast. So to know that you feel that makes my heart really happy. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share. And as I've said before, it can feel like I'm in a vacuum in this kind of podcast land, and I often don't know who's listening and what impact the episodes are having. So if you're listening to this and you've not yet left a review, it would be amazing if you did. You can just head over to iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts, rate the podcast and leave a review there. Not only does it help me to continue to create really useful and relevant episodes for you, but it also helps more working mums like you to benefit from the show, because the more reviews the show gets, the higher in the rankings it gets shown and the more people that get to see it. That's kind of how it works. So now back to the lessons from 2020. I'm going to start with the obvious one, that this year has taught me how much I've taken for granted. Freedom that really comes from seeing and physically connecting with the people who are important to me in my life. And I know that you will have felt that the same way too, because I think that's the kind of general impact that the pandemic has had on all of us. Despite moving away from home at 17 and living really in a few places around the UK, I moved back and settled into the village next to where I grew up, which, if you've heard me tell my story about this before, it was never what I expected. So I'm lucky that my family and my childhood friends are close. So over the years, I've really come to take that for granted. And this year, my dad had open heart surgery, kind of in the summer, right in the middle of the pandemic. And not being able to visit him in hospital was really hard. And having lost my mum kind of 15 years ago, the risk of losing the only other parent I have left in this world really brought that freedom into stark reality. And on top of that, like many of us, I had friends go through the unimaginable trauma of losing loved ones during this pandemic. One of my closest friends, who's godmother to my daughter, has navigated this year losing her dad and then both her father and mother-in-law kind of during this pandemic, and not being able to hug her when she was grieving was just unbearable at times, and it brought into focus the importance of this and how much I'd just taken that for granted in the past. And what surprised me about this year was just how much really I've actually enjoyed not being able to go anywhere either. Freedom is an important value to me. And one of the reasons I think I struggled with motherhood so much is that in some ways it challenged my freedom. So I thought that having the choice taken away to go places when I wanted to go was going to be more difficult than it actually was. So that was an interesting lesson. And so it kind of surprised me that I enjoyed the slower pace of life, not rushing to all the kids' activities, not feeling like I should be doing more or seeing more or experiencing more. That kind of slower pace of life really helped me to appreciate what I'd got right under my nose and on my doorstep. I remember having an experience right near the beginning of lockdown of cleaning out my fridge. And normally it's a job that I kind of don't enjoy doing at all. I know that it needs to be done, but I kind of do it begrudgingly. And early in lockdown, when getting food became a real privilege, with food deliveries difficult and supermarket shelves being emptied, I remember receiving my food delivery and cleaning out my fridge and doing it with so much joy and gratitude, and kind of wanting to capture that feeling in a bottle, because I didn't want to forget the privilege that it is to have access to food and have a home that I can be in safely and look after. And I also remember having a moment of realising really what I'd got around me. We bought a farmhouse, about 18 years ago, that literally needed kind of pulling apart and rebuilding. It was almost derelict, not quite, but and when we bought the house, it got a pond in the back garden. Literally, as we look out our kitchen window and patio doors, there's this pond. And when we bought the house, part of the deeds, the house stipulated that we needed to keep the pond, as it was kind of irrigation from the surrounding farmers' fields. And really, honestly, I didn't like the pond. It's actually more like a lake, actually, because we share it with the barn next door. So it's quite a big pond, but it's messy and it didn't always feel pretty to look at. And I wanted more of a kind of perfectly manicured lawn and garden out the back. And this pond is kind of more natural and less easy to kind of beautify. And I really, if I'm honest, didn't take the time to enjoy it or appreciate it. But this year, I literally saw it in a whole new way. My son kind of has enjoyed fishing on it most days, and we were able just to sit and watch the wildlife and feed the ducks on it. And it's something which I'm really ashamed to say that despite kind of having it for 18 years and it literally be on our doorstep, we hadn't done very often. And I've come to really love it, which I think is a great metaphor for what this year has taught me. Appreciating the everyday things, the things that we've come to take for granted, and the simple things that I can forget bring me joy or kind of a blessing in my life. And I'm sure you've had similar experiences of things in your life that you perhaps hadn't noticed or you'd taken for granted. And this year I've also learned that I enjoy being with my children more than I knew. And don't get me wrong, I love my children, and I think we kind of always feel like we need to declare this when we're about to share like a truth of mothering, which feels socially unacceptable. But my capacity for spending time with my children was really finite. And I remember when lockdown first kicked in, just this overwhelming feeling of anxiety of not knowing how to cope 24/7 with my kids indefinitely. But actually, I enjoyed it more than I thought. Of course, there were times during lockdown when I was way past my limits. My work has been busier than it's ever been, and combining that with home learning for a 7-year-old and with a 2-year-old has certainly had its moments. But I found being with my children, kind of being with them, better than actually doing stuff with them. So rather than rushing from one activity or class to another, actually just being with them and being at home. So my lesson for this year is being with my children allows me to access the joys of motherhood more than I had before. And actually, I enjoy it way more than doing stuff with my children. So that was kind of an unexpected kind of reflection for me. And also this year, I think it's taught us all the importance of health. And really, ever since my mum died kind of 15 years ago, I've held that in really sharp focus. That it doesn't matter how beautiful your house is, how much money you've got, or how amazing your wardrobe is. If you don't look after your body, you have nowhere else to live. So when my mum died, it really made me rethink my health, and I kind of changed some of the bad habits I'd picked up as a 20-something-year-old. I stopped my social smoking, I overhauled my eating habits, I started to really take care of my body. And over the last 15 years, I've literally become a healthier person for it. So in my 30s and 40s, I'm far healthier than I was in my 20s. But the one thing I hadn't really ever considered as much as I have this year is the impact of stress on my body. Although I knew logically that stress impacts our health, I'd seen it as more of a psychological health, as like a mental health. And this year, being in a situation where my body has been exposed, like most of us, to long-term stress, I kind of had this deeper realization that burnout is a result of being stuck in a situation where you're constantly exposed to stress without having the resources to deal with it. And the corona coaster of a year has certainly felt like that at times. And even as recording this, late in December, I had a call literally in the last 48 hours from my son's school to say that a child that he's been in contact with has tested positive for the virus. And so now he's got to isolate for 10 days, which means the plans that we had for Christmas Day have got changed right at the last minute. So I've got all this food in that I was going to be cooking for the grandparents, and we can't see them. So, that constant changing has really had an impact. And it's, what I've learned this year is really getting clear on the difference between the stresses and the stress. The stresses are what activate stress in our body, and they're really anything you can see, hear, touch, taste, smell, either real or imagined, both internal or external. So the stressor of me getting that call from the school, will have created stress for me. And stress is the neurobiological and kind of physiological shift that happens in your body in response to that perceived threat. And, our body's designed really well to cope with stress. It's kind of our evolutionary adaptive response. And, that cascade of changes in our body that create kind of physiological changes to help us survive. We're designed to do that. And I think there's three main factors that really cause stress. And it's the uncertainty, it's the lack of information, and the lack of control. And I think motherhood probably ticks all those boxes, but then motherhood in a pandemic kind of ticks them on steroids. So this year I could feel the old signs showing themselves from where I'd experienced adrenal fatigue in the past, that sense of burnout. And so I really wanted to dig deeper into this because this year, so many of us have been exposed to that chronic stress. And I kind of came across the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's a medical doctor with a special interest in kind of childhood development and trauma and their potential impacts into the long-term health, both physical and mental health. And he wrote a brilliant book called The Body Says No. And when I read that this year, it was a real eye-opener for me in terms of understanding the impact of kind of incomplete stress in our body. And he kind of says chronic stress is the activation of stress mechanism over long periods of time where a person is exposed to stresses that cannot be escaped, either because she does not recognise them or because she has no control over them. And I think that kind of pretty much sums up the pandemic. And that actually our bodies need to complete a stress cycle to operate healthily. That's what our bodies are naturally designed to do. And being stressed isn't a bad thing, but being stuck in a stress response without completing it is what's bad. And if you think about what's happened this year, we've been exposed to quite a lot of stresses, but haven't had the opportunity or resources to complete it because a lot of this has been outside of our control. So have a think. Have you spent the last year or perhaps more accumulating incomplete stress cycles? And if you have, the lesson for me this year is that I've had to reset my nervous system. I've had to intentionally pay attention to this. And I've spent time really tending to my nervous system so I can signal to my body that it's safe and it's safe to rest and restore and heal, instead of getting stuck in that kind of activating its fight, flight or freeze response. And with my burnout experience, I kind of knew this, and I used to reset on like a weekly and monthly basis. Weekly I would do this beautiful yoga class, and monthly I would do reflexology and acupuncture. And that felt enough to really keep my body balanced. But this year it proved to me that wasn't enough. It really wasn't enough. So I had to kind of up my reset game. So what I developed was kind of daily practices and even kind of throughout the day practices. So what I found worked for me is every morning I've started doing this sacred start. So rather than grabbing my phone or getting into the kind of family routine of getting everybody breakfast and sorted, I just get up that little bit earlier and take some time to sit. And for me, it's about lighting a candle, putting on some music, and really kind of just connecting back to me. So I do that every morning. I've started to build in what I call thrive time into my diary at lunchtime. So I book out some time to not only sit and have a nice lunch, but perhaps go for a walk or sit and have some quiet time or do some stretches. And I've got to admit that is still work in practice. There are many a day where my natural tendency is to override that because I'm a bit too busy, but I've literally got it booked out in my diary, and I have to kind of hold myself accountable when I don't do it. And I'm still doing my weekly yoga, but what I've added in as well is I'm doing another on a Wednesday night. It's called my midweek reset, where I do a rest and restore program with my brilliant friend Beth. And it's all about really working in rather than working out. And I think it's been really easy this year to watch other people in kind of on social media. It might be kind of doing these amazing things in lockdown and up in their fitness game and doing all this HIIT program so they're losing weight and getting healthy. And I found that I haven't had the energy to work out in the way that I perhaps have perceived everybody else to be doing. Because actually, without the intermittent recovery, we're not able to sustain energy. We're not able to sustain our positive emotions. And our fight, flight or freeze gets more easily triggered. And it kind of drains our energy and causes friction, internally, but also in our relationship with others. And it also reduces our cognitive capability. So we're not able to perform or focus as well, and we just become less productive. So what I want to carry into 2021 is this lesson of signaling safety in my body, literally resetting my nervous system, encouraging that rest, restore and heal response in my body. And I'm really learning to be kind and compassionate to my body. I'm kind of learning to comfort myself instead of criticize myself. And as somebody that, is a recovering overachiever, I'm used to pushing myself and over delivering and kind of over pushing my body. So I think doing this kind of and paying attention to resetting my body really thanked me for it. So I'm wondering, if you're listening to this, what resets you need to build into your rhythm? What could you add to your monthly kind of schedule that is a reset for you, or your weekly or daily or even morning, that resets your system and tells your body that it's safe if it needs that? Because if you too have found yourself in this overactivated sympathetic system, which is that kind of autonomic nervous response system of the fight and flight, we almost need to retrain our bodies back into the parasympathetic system of rest and digest and safety. And I also found this year that trying to juggle it all has taken its toll on my energy. And if my experience of burnout taught me anything, it's that energy is my most important currency. I literally can't love, I can't enjoy life, I can't give, nurture, support, do anything without energy. So as the pandemic has continued this year, like many of us, I found myself exhausted and struggling to find the energy to keep going. And, the sheer energy it's taken to navigate this virus and all the change and uncertainty it's brought has been huge. And it really brought me back to the question that I'm constantly asking, how can I live a life that lights me up without burning out. And my old ways of finding energy to do this actually weren't sustainable. I would use willpower and conscientiousness and duty and obligation and perhaps coffee and sugar and striving and comparison and that guilt and inner judge and inner critic. They would drive me to get stuff done. But, undoubtedly they can be effective, but they're definitely not sustainable. So this year, to navigate it without burning out, I've really paid attention to my energy sources. And I've been thinking about this, about kind of in terms of 3 energy sources. And they're called the 3 S's. So thinking about the support and the source. So thinking about self-energy, support energy, and source energy. And my natural tendency is to focus on my self-energy. I'm a strong, independent woman that can control her life. I'm the mistress of my own destiny. If I want more energy, I just need to eat better, sleep better, which are all true, but it's not the full picture. We don't operate in isolation, and we're really limited to what we can achieve as one person. And just focusing on that self-energy can leave me in superwoman mode. So I've started to really lean into the energy from the support around me and knowing that is so important, learning to ask for help, learning to receive help, learning and looking for ways to connect and leverage the energy of others. Because as humans, we're built for that connection and support. And as modern women, we can feel that we need to do it all and do it all alone. And we know that it takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to raise a mother. And I've really been focusing on my village this year. Who do I want in it? Who do I need in it in terms of the people and the resources I can have around me to stop me falling into that independent superwoman mode? So this year I've invested in myself and the support I have around me. I've invested in my own coaching, which I've always done because as any good coach does, we have our own coaching. I've invested in my coaching supervision, which has really helped me and resource me showing up in the best way for my clients. And I've also invested in a psychotherapist. And I can honestly say that investing in myself and my support is always the best investment I can make. It transforms me personally and professionally. I've also invested in an incredible virtual assistant who is helping me really manage my business. And I've invested in a business course to help me build my business in a sustainable way and to support as many of you as possible. And I think these things have helped me to navigate this year with more ease and feeling like I've got some amazing people in my village. But this year has also got me thinking about my life force. And as Chinese medicine, they call it qi. Exploring my source energy. And I've started to think about my connection to my inner wisdom, my intuition, my life force, that universal energy, or maybe you call it God or goddess or quantum physics or Mother Nature. Whatever you call it really doesn't matter, but actually leaning into something bigger than me has really helped me through this year. I feel like I'm only just starting my journey with this, but what it's looked like for me is doing this sacred start every morning, just having quiet time and music that makes me feel connected to something bigger. So I've really intentionally chosen music that helps me to do that. And it's about lighting a candle and creating a sacred space and asking the universe for help and actually handing over some of my to-do list to it. And it might sound woo-woo, but the big stuff that feels too much out of my control or influence, I literally say this internal prayer and to ask for the support and guidance that I need. I find it really reassuring knowing that I'm not on my own. And whether this stuff was true or not really doesn't matter. But the feeling I get from that extra energy is what I'm measuring its success by. And actually connecting to my source energy has been really comforting and supporting this year. So just perhaps reflect on where you get your energy from. What sources are you using? And what other sources might be available to you that you haven't really paid attention to? I think overall, this year, despite all of its challenges and heartache, has made me stronger and wiser. And just that recognition that resilience isn't about pushing through. It's not about mental toughness. And I love this quote from Mariam Hasna, who says, resilience isn't about pushing through and past your limits. It's about building capacity and resource internally so that you have the energy to skillfully meet what life is presenting you with. And I love that. And I think that's really been one of my lessons from this year, is about, we've had real little insight and certainty over to what life was going to present us with this year. So I've had to kind of take a step back and, rather than try and control everything, focus inwards on my internal resources and capacity to meet what life kind of was showing. And I hope that hearing my reflections on 2020 have been useful. And I'd love to hear yours too. So drop me an email or tag me on social media, because I always love to hear from you. But if you'd like the support of nearly 30 other inspirational women, then I'd like you to check this out. If you're ready to kick off 2021 in style and really want to feel replenished, focused, and ready for the year ahead, I'd like to invite you to come and join me and an amazing lineup of expert speakers across the areas of well-being, lifestyle, mindset, relationships, career, business and wealth. I've literally gone around the world and curated this lineup of speakers who I think are just incredible. And I'm hosting the Thrive Summit. That's kind of an exclusive online conference dedicated to working mums just like you. And it's taking place on the 17th of January. And each speaker will be sharing insights, advice, and actionable tips to help you feel inspired, empowered, and replenished for 2021 and beyond. And I feel now more than ever we need this. So if you head over to wisdom4workingmums.co.uk/thrive, that's wisdom for FOR working mums mums.co.uk/thrive. You can find all the details on there, and I promise you're not going to want to miss out. So head over there and check out all the details. And I'd just like to leave you with this note from Jamie Vron. It's almost 2021, and you're going to feel the pressure to evaluate 2020 by the way your body looks, the amount in your bank account, how much you got done or did not get done. And how about this idea? Don't evaluate it. Don't look back and wish you'd done it differently. You survived this year. You tore your way through chaos and pain and anxiety and uncertainty and stress and collective fear, and you learned how to comfort yourself in a crisis. You learned the depth of your empathy, and you learned how to give yourself a break. Did you give yourself rest when you wanted to keep pushing? Do you trust yourself more? Did you deepen your relationships? Do you see now how resilient you are? That matters too. What you did or didn't do is not nothing, but it's not everything. If you made a home within yourself in 2020, that's enough. If you feel bent, broken and burned out by now, lay it all down. Breathe. You've done enough. You are enough. Let 2021 crest over you gently and ease your way into it. You deserve that exhale. So until next time, take care and thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.